Apologies, speakers. We're just trying to sort out the moderator quickly.
Good afternoon, everybody. I think let's start while they try and sort out the technical issues, because I'm sure that everyone can't wait for us. Let's call him the initiator. Deal with this webinar. But in the meantime, I'm Advocate Fourie. I'm from the organization Undoing Tax Abuse, but I'm joined by two esteemed colleagues, Lawson and Valencia. Maybe just also introduce yourselves. I'm sure that everybody knows who you are, but just just to get this going. Maybe you go first, Valencia.
Oh, okay, thanks. My name's Valencia Dalane. I'm a senior journalist for Corruption Watch. I've been with Corruption Watch since, of course, its inception in 2012. And of course, the topics that we are traversing today have been of interest to our organization for quite a while. Thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you. Lawson, I'm sure you don't need any introduction, but you know what? Go ahead.
Thank you, Stephanie and Valencia. It's good to be here with you this afternoon. My name is Lawson Naidu. I'm the Executive Secretary of CASAC, which is the Council for the Advancement of the South African Constitution, an organization that's taken a keen interest in combating corruption and with a particular focus over the last few years on the State Capture Commission of Inquiry. So looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, and I think as stated in the chat, please, let us know what you want out of this webinar. I think everybody here is passionate about, eradicating corruption, and state capture was a very big part of that. And, a part of what I need to sort of speak about today is the role of the State Capture Commission in transparency and accountability. So where did it all begin? I think we will all be reminded that this sort of started with the whole Nkandla story and the Public Protector's report. And a purpose of a commission is always to, investigate the matters of public concern. And the State Capture Commission, if one look at its terms of reference, the terms of reference was published on the 23rd of January 2018. So we are actually on a 3-year journey where their terms of reference or their purpose was to inquire into certain things and make findings and obviously recommendations. And some of that inquiry that was needed to be made was, was there any undue influence over our executives and the president? And please, I am not going to read from the terms of reference because I think that is going to waste time, and I think we all know what it was about. But it's just to give a little bit of background. And also, was there any breach of or infringement of the Constitution by our executives or the president, unlawful tenders, and it all, I think it was all sort of based in what was the influence of the Gupta family. So, like we all know, this has been a 3-year journey. What is good to maybe say is that, in this webinar, we're not only going to deal with, the role of the State Capture Commission and what we hope the recommendations will be, but also, the NPA and the police and their role. Now, in the beginning, the State Capture Commission was very private. They couldn't share any information, and thank goodness the president then say that they can share the information, and that was extremely important, and I think a milestone in the State Capture Commission. And I think we will all agree that we heard a lot of nasty things during in the State Capture Commission. I think what we heard is breaches and violation of the Constitution and so many policies and so forth, and ethical standard and rules. So the question is, to come back, what was the commissioner's role in, for example, accountability? Now, I actually just to sort of understand what does accountability mean, and I just had a look at some definitions. And accountability is responsibility, and I also it's an obligation or willingness to accept responsibility to account for one's actions. Accountability in good governance is the relationship between state and society at large in providing and demanding governance. So immediately one can see that accountability is about good governance and taking that responsibility. Now, the question about the role of the State Capture Commission and accountability and transparency is a complex one. Will the State Capture Commission in itself ensure accountability? Well, it depends on what you understand of accountability. I think that the role of the State Capture Commission was huge. I think it played an enormous role. And the recommendation and findings that will flow from the State Capture Commission will also speak to what extent did it give accountability and transparency. But what did we see with the State Capture Commission? And the question then is, will it achieve it? And initially, I have to admit that I was cynical, because for me, accountability is, we should prosecute the criminals. We should make sure that people are in orange overalls. And don't get me wrong, I think as a society, we are still asking for that. But that's not the only way in order to achieve accountability. And after hearing all this shenanigans, is that I think what the State Capture Commission did in terms of accountability is to shine a light, which also speak to transparency, as to what went wrong. And that the minute one can see what went wrong, you can start fixing it. You can start by trying to establish what should we do in future in order to make sure that this never ever happens again, that state capture never ever happens again. So firstly, the commission was very good at doing the investigations. I think that hearing all the testimony, there's a lot of the work that the State Capture Commission did that they can just go give over to the NPA and make the task for the NPA so much better. We also know that, the NPA was very slow out of the blocks because state capture at the MPA made sure that, you know, we haven't seen an enormous amount of prosecutions. So the State Capture Commission made sure that there's investigations, and at least we're moving in the right direction. I think it's also validation for so many journos that said, but there's something wrong here. And after having the State Capture Commission, we know, you know, that there was something wrong. Something very wrong happened. I think it's also validation for civil society that is saying, you know what, corruption is an evil. And this is why, because the State Capture Commission also shone a light on, you know, corruption, the extent of corruption, and what that does to a nation. And then obviously the State Capture Commission is in a position to give recommendations so that we can right the wrongs and really make sure that this doesn't happen again. And I think that without the State Capture Commission, would we as a nation have heard all of this? I think the Commission granted us an opportunity and a platform to just hear the extent of state capture and corruption and all of that. So it has given a platform for individuals and South Africans that may not, in normal circumstances, have known the extent of what happened. So I've alluded to the fact that I think that the State Capture Commission pointed out by leading evidence all the shortcomings. For example, and I want to start off by saying that, you know, I think it showed how Parliament failed us. We have just recently, with the Conrad Adenauer Stiftung, launched a book, Permitted Plundering, how Parliament failed SA. And I think it was quite clear in the State Capture Commission how that happened. And I'm just going to use a few examples. Let's start off by our esteemed previous Minister of Mineral Resources, Msebenzi Zwane. You know, the allegations are that while he was the minister, a lot of shenanigans happened. But what happened? He resigned as minister. Where is he now? He is the chairperson of a transport committee in Parliament. So was there really accountability? I'll let you answer that question. Where are all the portfolio committees investigating the enormous amount of allegations of state capture in huge SOEs like Eskom and so forth? Where were those investigations? They were started, but they never finished. Faith Mujambi, she was the previous Minister of Communication. There were serious allegations against her, and ALTA also filed complaints against her, and basically for her part in sharing information with the Guptas. Where is she now? She's the chairperson of the Portfolio Committee on Environment, Forestry and Fisheries. Our previous Minister of Mineral Resources were quite involved in the whole Fruity Dairy Farm debacle that I think had a huge impact on that local community. So what did that tell us? Despite complaints to the Ethics Committee, despite there being so many articles of state capture and what happened, is that Parliament actually did nothing. I think, you know, Parliament sort of shut their eyes and went about their own business. And that during testimony at the State Capture Commission, it was quite clear, party over South Africa. And we had the opportunity at the State Capture Commission to deal with this type of thing in order then hopefully to give a recommendation. How do we make that better? I think that also speaks to, you know, the Electoral Act, and that there really is a need for people to hold their representatives accountable. I think as South Africans, we want to see a Parliament that will deal with matters in our best interest, not the political parties. You know, I sometimes say, and please forgive me, that political parties is probably a necessary evil, But they are there as representatives in Parliament to hold the executive to account, make sure that they do what they are supposed to do in terms of our constitution. And maybe it is time. There is now an opportunity for Parliament to look at the Electoral Act and make sure that it's there in the best interest of society. I think, it also highlighted the fact that we need, a professional public service. We need people that will, work for South Africa because they, it's a passion for them to service South Africans. That, this whole, I think what it also highlighted is that it will require some political will. This whole thing about innocent until proven guilty. Yes, if you are a criminal, you are innocent until proven guilty. But that's not the only way to hold people to account. What about disciplinary steps? That was lacking, and that was highlighted by the State Capture Commission. I think it highlighted the fact that we need ethical leaders, that sometimes something may not be criminal, but it may be unethical, and that those type of people need to be removed. This is all things that was, in my view, highlighted the maybe lack of accountability. What is transparency? And it's interesting, the definition, to see what actions are performed. Now, I think the State Capture Commission showed why transparency is so important for our democracy. Civil society needs a transparent government in order to ensure accountability. So transparency equals accountability. Now, this begs the question, was the State Capture Commission worth it? Again, I want to ask, was the State Capture Commission worth it? It cost the taxpayers money. At some point, the figure was 864 million rand, nearly R1 billion. And I would like to still say, yes, it was absolutely worth it. Judge Londo is the one that said and referred to just the repayment of McKinsey of some of the money due to the State Capture Commission makes it worth it. It makes it worth it, as I've already said, to see where things went wrong in order for us to now move forward and make sure, and I'm going to repeat myself, make sure that it does not happen again. Let's just look at it's always a tragedy, I think, is, the budgets of the MPA and the SAPS and the Hawks. And so where is our priorities? And I think that the State Capture Commission is one of those priorities that deserved to be a priority. I just went and looked at the budget again, and the MPA's budget was cut by 422 million rand for the 21-22 budget. The Hawks budget was reduced from 2.13 billion to 2.079 billion. So all those budgets were reduced. What is, for me, the saddest moment is to realize that the Protection Service budget was actually increased, and that their budget at 3.232 billion rand is 1.2 billion rand more than the Hawks. So was this money spent on the State Capture Commission worth it? Absolutely. Because what we learned from that is priceless. And it sort of shows the need for a proper, MPA, SAPS that functions at the highest level. That the Attorney General has an enormous role to play. And then obviously, civil society. What it also, I think, shows us is that civil society cannot sleep at the wheel. That we never, ever, ever, ever again should sleep and let just, look the other way. We need to hold government to account in order to make sure that government governs in the best interest of each and every South African. But I also think the role of the State Capture Commission is education. I do think that a lot of people had the opportunity to hear the extent of state capture, but there is still a large number of society, due to our high unemployment rate, that probably did not have the ability to just listen to what happened. And they will probably say, but you know what, state capture, I'm struggling to feed a family. I'm struggling day to day to feed myself. Why would I worry about state capture? And it is true, but the consequences of corruption is dire. The consequences of corruption we see now each and every day in our unemployment rate. The fact that we do not have enough resources to make sure that each and every South African has got access to water, access to education, and that has got a full tummy at the end of the day. That it has an impact on business, that has an impact on our economy. And that corruption favors an elite few, and that not everybody, gets something out of it, that it's to the detriment of an enormous amount of our community. And that, we need education. We need to educate civil society to say no to corruption, because it has an impact on you, a direct impact on you. I think what it shows is that we need, the appointments to SOE boards, for example. Is there something, that we can do in terms of appointments on SOE, making sure that there is ethical leadership? So what, we can fix it, and we can fix the damage. Transparency, let civil society become more involved. Ethical leadership, get rid of the rot. Regulatory environment that makes it possible for business to thrive. And ethical leaders in our SOE boards. I think, however, I see Lerato, thank you. I think, yes, it is indeed possible to hear from other panelists. That is my view, but let's hand it over to Dawson. Over to you. Let's hear from you as well.
Great. Well, thanks, Stephanie, for that, quite a comprehensive overview of the State Capture Commission of Inquiry and some of the issues that relate to it. I'm going to resist the temptation and try not to repeat or cover issues that you've already covered quite adequately. So let me try and focus on some additional aspects. As you pointed out, the commission was established in January of 2018 by former President Jacob Zuma. It started its public hearings in August of 2018, so we had pretty much 3 years of hearings, of testimony from various witnesses, and the commission has sought and been granted various extensions. I think it's been 5 in total, 3 this year. There was a deadline of March 2021, which then got extended to June, and then got extended to September, and now we're sitting with the deadline of the end of next month, the end of December, where Deputy Chief Justice Zondo is due to present his report to the President. So it's been a long process, almost 4 years by the time this report is submitted to the President. And if you look at it in the context of what the Public Protector said in the State of Capture report in 2017 that gave rise to this Commission of Inquiry, is that it was her view, Advocate Madonsela, that commission of inquiry needed to be established because the Office of the Public Protector didn't have the time nor the resources or capacity to conduct a wide-ranging investigation that was necessitated by the evidence and information that was available to her. She therefore recommended the Commission of Inquiry and envisaged that it would have a lifespan of 6 months and that this work could be completed in 6 months. Now, I don't know the basis on which Advocate Madonsela said that, but it is a little bit surprising to me that of the scores of witnesses that have appeared before Deputy Chief Justice Zondo, I would have thought that Advocate Madonsela might have been one of the first witnesses to be called to give her her view on what she had uncovered in her investigation. We know that the State of Capture report provides the backdrop to this commission, and the commission has used the information in that report. But I would have thought that the commission might have benefited from some of the insights of Advocate Madonsela. But be that as it may. So we've had this process going on for quite some time now, despite pressure from civil society organizations and others. Deputy Chief Justice Zondo has resisted the temptation to produce interim reports or to report on issues as he's dealt with them. And you know, this has been a wide-ranging investigation covering numerous different areas, not just issues that emanated from the State of Capture report, but the terms of reference broadened the scope of inquiry of the Commission much more broadly. We know that the Commission has structured itself into 18 different work streams, largely dealing with state-owned enterprises, but also dealing with issues around appointments, the role of Parliament, which Stephanie has touched on, and which I'll come back to in a moment. The role of the Guptas, and particularly their interactions with Mr. Zuma and members of his family, as well as various other specific issues like the Frida Dairy Farm matter, the Waterkloof landing, and the like. So there's been a wide-ranging inquiry and investigation by the Commission and its investigative team, ably led by the former Auditor General Terence Nombembe. So what can we expect from the report when it comes out in a few weeks' time, as we hope it will? So I anticipate that the report will broadly be in two different parts. There'll be a part of the report that looks at the fact-finding aspect, the investigative aspect of what the Commission has uncovered from the work of its investigating team, as well as from the testimony that it has heard from various witnesses. And it is likely to make findings on at least some, if not all of those matters in terms of what went wrong, who was responsible, what the problems were, where further investigations may be required, and where prosecutions are being recommended against specific individuals. And I'll come back to the issue of the NPA as well in a couple of moments. So that, for me, is the sort of the backward-looking part of the exercise that the Deputy Chief Justice will have engaged in. The other part of it, and I think for the purposes of what we want to look at here, is how do we strengthen our constitutional framework, our constitutional institutions, to withstand attempts at state capture and corruption in the future. And I think for me, that's a very, very important part, the forward-looking part of what the report is likely to do. And I think that's in that regard, we'll have to look very carefully at the recommendations that come from the Deputy Chief Justice. Stephanie, again, has touched on some of the issues. CASAC itself made a fairly detailed submission to the Commission in the middle of last year, 2020, and we were called upon to give oral evidence in February this year. And what the Deputy Chief Justice wanted to hone in from the CASAC submission was the role of Parliament, the failures of Parliament to exercise adequate oversight and to identify and to stop these corrupt practices from taking place. And so in our submission, we looked at not so much what went wrong because others, such as Outer, had done that. But we rather focused on what Parliament could do to strengthen its institutional capacity to exercise that effective oversight. And we've made some suggestions, for example, that there should be an accountability standards legislation that compels Parliament to conduct extensive oversight into organs of state, with government departments and state-owned enterprises and other organs of state, and that there's a compulsion on Parliament to do so. So what we've seen in the past is that Parliament simply turning a blind eye to things and making excuses as to why certain appointments have been made in state-owned companies or government departments, and why things, procurement processes have gone awry, but Parliament basically chose to turn a blind eye and not to do anything about it. So one certainly hopes that Zonda will make some recommendations with regard to how Parliament can strengthen its own oversight mechanisms through a range of interventions. The other issue, which again Stephanie touched on, is the issue of the electoral system. Now we know, and I'm sure we can come back to this in discussion, so I won't dwell on it, is that the electoral system is currently being reviewed by Parliament because of the judgment of the Constitutional Court in June last year that gave Parliament 2 years to amend the Electoral Act to make provision for independent candidates to contest national and provincial elections. But, you know, reform of the electoral system is not a silver bullet that's going to solve our accountability problems. It might create a closer nexus between the electorate and individual MPs if we have, for example, a constituency system of some sort. But that in itself is not going to solve the problem without Parliament's own systems being much more robust in extracting that information and oversight over the executive. And the third part of what CASAC submitted to the State Capture Commission was about how do we strengthen the institutional capacity of our anti-corruption framework. So, you know, to a large extent, the legal framework in terms of the identification and criminalization of corrupt activities is covered by the existing legislation. There may be an argument to strengthen it and tweak it here or there, but by and large, that legislative framework is fairly sound. Where the weakness lies is in the institutional mechanisms to tackle corruption. And what we see is a plethora of anti-corruption agencies. So we've got numerous bodies that have overlapping mandates to deal with corruption. To start off with the Office of the Public Protector, which is how this whole process of the inquiry came about, because the Office of the Public Protector investigated state capture. We have the Auditor General's Office that oversees the financials of all government departments and organs of state, that is therefore able to also deal with issues of corruption and malpractice. And then we have the SAPs, we have the Hawks, we have the Special Investigating Unit, and numerous other bodies, you know, given some sort of mandate to combat corruption. And what has happened in parallel with this process of the State Capture Commission is that government and civil society have been working together to develop a national anti-corruption strategy. Now, this is a strategy that was finalized just over a year ago in November last year and formally adopted by Cabinet at that point. It has 6 clear pillars that are identified as part of what it calls a whole of society approach to combating corruption. How do we get all South Africans engaged in this fight against corruption? Because the state can't do it on its own, civil society can't do it on its own, and we all therefore all need to work together. And one of the things that lies at the heart of this national anti-corruption strategy is the establishment of what is called a National Anti-Corruption Advisory Committee or Council. And just a few days ago, I think it was last weekend, that government has now advertised for nominations for people to serve on that council, which will be an independent advisory body to the president. And one of the key tasks will be to make recommendations to the president on institutional options regarding the anti-corruption architecture. As civil society and certainly as CASAC, we have argued very strongly for 10 years now that we need a truly independent anti-corruption agency. For example, the SIU operates on the basis of a mandate that is given to them by the president before they can investigate anything. So they're not independent because they rely on a mandate from the president to do so. The NPA, I'll come to in a moment. The Hawks, the fact that they're located within the South African Police Service certainly undermines any pretense at independence within that body. And therefore, there's a strong need for an independent agency. So let me finally deal in a couple of minutes with the issue of the National Prosecuting Authority, which I know many of you are interested in. So the NPA relies on investigations that are done outside of itself. So by the Hawks would investigate a matter of corruption, prepare a docket, and hand it over to the NPA to prosecute. What's changed in the last 2 years is that soon after the appointment of the NDPP advocate Batoy in early 2019, a few months later, the president established an investigating directorate within the NPA, which the NPA Act provides for, and that's the unit that is currently being headed by Hermione Cornier, and that has a mandate a specific mandate to prosecute corruption and state capture cases. So there's a dedicated structure there within the NPA that has powers of investigation as well as prosecution. So a scorpion's light, if you like. Now, they suffer from issues of capacity and resources, as Stephanie has explained, with the the weakening of financial support for the NPA. But there are a lot of things that can be done. So what has happened, and again, as Stephanie referred to earlier, the regulations governing the functioning of the Commission of Inquiry were amended in the middle of last year, July 2020. Which made it much easier for the Commission of Inquiry to share information, especially information unearthed by its investigating arm, with law enforcement agencies, with the Hawks, as well as with the NPA and the ID. And that's a process that we assume has been continuing. What the change in the regulations also did was to make it possible for people who are working in the investigating unit at the Commission to leave and to join either the Hawks, the ID, or the NPA itself, and that they would be able to use the information that they gleaned whilst they were working at the Commission as part of those continuing investigations. So that's an important link, if you like, between the work of the Commission on the one hand and the work of state prosecuting agencies on the other. Just perhaps a couple of final words around this. We see that this phenomenon of state capture has not ended, despite the Commission of Inquiry, and the Commission itself is not going to do that. And we've seen more than adequate evidence of that with the levels of corruption that we've seen during the pandemic, particularly regarding PPE procurement and related issues such as the digital vibes matter and so on. So this is a continuing phenomenon, despite the spotlight that the Zondo Commission has put on issues. So one of the things that I think that the NPA can and should be doing is to look to simplify the way they prosecute cases. What we have at the moment is an attempt to try and prosecute people for every possible transgression that they've committed. So we see really complex documents with dozens, if not hundreds of counts within one docket. And, you should simply go through a process and say, where is our strongest case? And even if we narrow it down to 2 or 3 counts and we secure conviction and we can get people either jailed or fined or whatever as a result of that, it's a better option, which is also then reminiscent of what one would refer to as the Al Capone option, which is to look at the tax transgressions of people implicated in corruption and state capture and see whether prosecutions under the tax legislation may not provide a simpler way to secure convictions. The last point I want to make about this, we focus very much on the state and the public sector aspect of this. But one of the things that has come out of the Commission of Inquiry is the complicity of the private sector and big business in particular in collaborating and extracting rents from the state. And the response of the business sector is going to be important, as well as how the state and its prosecuting authorities deal with those private sector transgressors. Recouping the money is part of that process. It's important to get back what was stolen, but we also need to ensure that when it comes to the private sector, that there are also prosecutions. Let me leave it there for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lawson. Good afternoon, colleagues. My name is Pamanda Mhlo, Senior Programs Officer at the Democracy Development Program. I'd like to thank initially Stephanie and Lawson for taking over with such stride in the beginning parts of this session. And of course, we have been having some technical challenges, but I think Valencia will help us close the discussion, at least the initial part of this discussion, quite well, as we explore some of the more human sides of exposing these types of maladministration and corruption, particularly with the work of Corruption Watch being, as well as outer in many instances, relying so heavily on the work of individuals who are essentially saviors in the space in which we find ourselves, when they want to be able to be in a space where they expose certain acts of corruption and maladministration. What does the whistleblower legislation currently tell us, and how is the State of Capture Commission engaged with this, particularly as we saw in recent media, the murder, for instance, of Babita Dokran, the fear from the Mr. Willem, who had to essentially escape from the country, as it were. Some whistleblowers, whilst they're able to capitalize and at least do some work, maybe write or author books around what they've seen, are losing out on opportunities for employment because they're just simply blocked by the system. To what extent are we protecting and enabling whistleblowing as a feature of this ridding our country of the corruption? Valencia, over to you.
Thanks a lot, Brian. Firstly, I'd like to congratulate you on bringing the topic of whistleblowers and the impact of corruption, and of course the civic duty in reporting corruption, and the other topics that my colleagues have already touched on. I think it's very important that we have a discussion about not just what people need to do in terms of exposing corruption, but the fact that the difficulty in people doing that successfully and in large numbers comes from what Stephanie highlighted earlier as being the lack of accountability on the part of people who participate or enable corruption. Until such time that we people, you and me, are able to see people who are participating in corruption actually take accountability and be face consequences for participating in such, less and less people are going to be encouraged to report corruption and see the journey through. Having said that, I would say that in terms of legislation that covers the space of whistleblowers, again, like my colleagues have said, just like in other areas of the space of anti-corruption, that too requires a lot of work. There's a lot that needs to be looked at in terms of what protecting a whistleblower looks like. But even before that, we need to be able to redefine the whistleblower and how the legislation that we have currently, the Public Disclosures Act, for instance, how that looks at whistleblowers and what to what extent the limitations of that legislation impact on the lack of courage to report corruption by general members of the public. Now, the PDA, the Public Disclosures Act, currently views the typical whistleblower as a person who reports corruption within the workplace, in the workplace environment, whereas experience in, for instance, the work of Corruption Watch and other civil society organizations shows that whistleblowers come in very many forms. Just about every report that we receive of corruption requires the same amount of support, to a certain extent, the same amount of protection for that person, be it a parent who comes to Corruption Watch or any other institution, public institution, to report a case of perhaps a public school that is not managing its finances properly, or any other service that people, members of the public, use on a daily, like your health facilities, police stations, and the works. So people who report that should be included in the PDA as part of what it labels whistleblowers, and for that reason, they should also enjoy the same support and protection that the law gives to what it currently does for those who do so in the environment, in the work space, in the environment of the workspace. And so having said that, I would say how we go about protecting such people is very important. Currently, we're looking at, if somebody walks into the offices of the Public Protector's Office or Corruption Watch even, one of the standard questions that we ask whistleblowers is whether or not they feel safe in reporting instances of corruption to us. And more often than not, the case will be, look, as far as I can tell, I'm safe. I don't know if anything's going to change as the case develops or the investigation develops and goes further. So for that reason, they may be considering perhaps in future retracting their participation in the process of blowing the whistle and stuff like that. The protection of that person comes in the form of, like I say, whether or not they are security threats to themselves or to the members of their family or anyone that may be associated with them. But one of the things that Corruption Watch has called for is that the scope of the protection service that is stipulated within the PDA, for instance, be broadened to the extent that such people are also provided support in terms of whatever financial detriment they may suffer. For instance, if an employee, a public servant, is in the process of reporting corruption to that has happened within the space of their employer, that they not only be afforded protection for not being victimized or suspended and whatever the circumstances may be, but that their livelihood, their financial stability be ensured and be supported and be protected in the same light, and that beyond just, of course, the monthly salary that the person may be earning, they also need to be assured that no one's going to interfere with or whatever their retirement packages and things like that in future. So they would have to be supported in that regard. Furthermore, on a more personal note, whistleblowing is not an easy task. It's necessary. It's encouraged. We have hotlines across the board that call for people to blow the whistle to ensure that they report whatever corruption that they may come across or witness. However, the difficulty with a situation where a whistleblower may come forward may well be that they would have, by the time they reach that point of wanting to report, they have sort of made a covenant with themselves, so to speak, for lack of a better word, that they're going to seek justice where it's necessary and take the step of reporting corruption, and without knowing what the consequences of such an act are going to be. And a lot of the times, the detriment on them goes beyond just the financial that I've mentioned, as well as the security factor, but also their mental health as well. I don't think it's something we can take lightly, that a person who is drawn through a process of perhaps being victimized for having reported corruption, they're going to be fully capacitated to carry on with the work that they had always been doing, without worrying about whether or not their livelihood will not be touched or will not be affected by those who against whom they've reported corruption. So there are many factors to the legislation that we feel as an organization require a lot of attention. And the fact that in labeling people whistleblowers, we need to give them in order to encourage people to come forward with reports of corruption, we need to give them the incentives that they are not going to suffer consequences that perhaps make their lives difficult. We recently conducted, as Corruption Watch, a survey where we tried to ascertain through public opinion what people know to be whistleblowing, what the process what they understand the process to be, and how what their attitudes to how they would participate in such. And we found that a majority of people who participated in the survey, our sample was just over 2,000, and it was done over a period of 2 months. The majority of the people who participated in this told us that they understood the process of blowing the whistle to be, going into a police station, going into the public protector's office, coming to Corruption Watch to lay a complaint and saying that this has happened. Either you're more than welcome to share my name with the people I'm implicating, or protect my identity from the people I'm implicating. But the importance of this is that I want to see justice done. So the point I'm trying to make here is that there's an immediate and very urgent need for a public education drive, I think, from not just government, but also civil society, from civil society as well, as on how people identify the process of blowing the whistle should go, what it is that people understand what it is that they're entering into, that they're getting themselves into, the level of protection that people are likely to enjoy under the current legislation, of course. And with the conversations that we're having, we're hoping that there will be in future changes to this legislation, as I mentioned earlier. And of course, to what extent people are encouraged to spread the word and encourage others as well to do the same, participate in the process of blowing the whistle. I mean, a lot of the participants in our survey understood appreciated the importance of the process of blowing the whistle to be in the process of curbing corruption in the country. But of course, again, the common message again is that something needs to happen. I cannot just report corruption, or we cannot report corruption in huge numbers and not have anything happen to those that we implicate, that we view to be perpetrators of such. And there's an unfortunate bit that we found in the survey to be that there's very little trust in public institutions, your police, your office of the DPCI, the Hawks. There's general faith in offices, Chapter 9 institutions, but it is mostly that the feedback that we got was mostly that people are more willing to report corruption or trust in reporting corruption to civil society organizations because they believe that there is a sense of empathy from people who work in this space more than they would most likely find in public office. I say it's unfortunate because in order for people to be able to have faith in their systems, they need to be using them, obviously, and testing their abilities and capacities to work on and investigate and hopefully successfully prosecute and convict people who are involved in corruption. So the fact that from the sample that we got, people are generally not in a space where they trust fully that public institutions are the way to go to report corruption is a bit of a problem. So that public education element needs to happen. There needs to be confidence restored in members of the public that something will be done when they do report corruption, and that there will be accountability on the part of those who take part in corruption. And my hope is that from the perspective of the Zondo Commission, that there will be part of the recommendations in this space and in this area of its work will be for such to happen, that government engage itself on a drive to educate the public and reassure the public on what it can do and what it is capacitated to do, and that we don't lose any more professionals in the from the public service, and we don't incur any further losses of skills and capacity in the public service than we already have due to corruption, or due to people seeing corruption as a detriment to working in the public service. I think that I should end it at that for now. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Valencia. Thank you to all three of our speakers. I'd like to invite our other two speakers to join us again for just a general discussion on some of the key discussions that we've already had in our process. One of the things that I heard, at least in part, is there are potentially a lot more mechanisms that aren't being utilized by the state institutions, by Parliament, and perhaps even by other role players such as the National Prosecution Authority. Lawson, in response to that, had said something of the nature that perhaps there's a need to think about how to prosecute differently in order to ensure that we have the right sort of mechanisms for accountability. Part of what Advocate Fick was talking about was also the idea that we need to be thinking about discussions around accountability, not just in the legal sense, but in terms of internal procedures where people are working. Where are the disciplinary hearings? How are political parties responding to accusations against individual members of their political parties and so forth. So perhaps what I would like to talk about in that instance, and anyone can feel free to chip in, is one of the things that was talked about, or at least one of the polls that we published in our discussion, was around the perception about whether the commission was successful in conducting its duties. We are currently, I think at this point, zoomed out. People are fatigued with the amount of Zoom things that are happening. The amount of talking, also citizens are quite exhausted by the amount of talking that there seems to be in the public space. They just want to see more action being done. And in the same vein, I think there have been quite a number of commissions that have been instituted, at least in the past 5 to 10 years. And in reality, it doesn't necessarily feel as though the recommendations of those commissions are being taken seriously by the implementing bodies that are meant to take forward those recommendations. What do we do as civil society to try, one, to think through the alternative mechanisms for accountability, as we might have spoken about already, to press on those issues. Secondly, to try and ensure that this doesn't just become one of those commissions, especially as Advocate Fick has outlined the cost to citizens financially, insofar as what this specific work of this commission has undertaken. That's the one part of the discussion I'd like us to talk about. The secondary consideration then is a core feature of the State Capture Commission was meant to be talking as well as talking about what was the role of private interests in creating an environment where corruption and maladministration was the order of the day. Are we speaking sufficiently about the private and corporates in particular, about the level of accountability that they should be that should be there? Think about the auditing companies that participated in some of the whitewashing of statements to ensure that corruption itself was difficult to show up, that approved things that clearly weren't meant to be approved on the basis of the amount of inaccuracies or clear maladministration that was happening. To what extent are they being held accountable? Are there individual accounting bodies in those spaces creating enough of a buffer for citizens to not have to be the ones who are dealing with the burden of corruption? Anyone can feel free to start off, particularly between yourself, Advocate, and Mr. Lawson Mlaidu. Either of the two of you, whilst we give Valencia an opportunity to breathe after her presentation.
Lawson, you want to go?
Okay, thanks. Yeah, there's a lot in what you've said there, Brian, but let me try and pick up a couple of strands of that. Let me start with the last point you made, which is about the role of the private sector. And I think this is a critically important one, which I reflected on briefly earlier. But I think, there has been a tendency to see corruption as a public sector phenomenon, and that it is something that afflicts particularly the public sector. But as we've seen from the Commission of Inquiry, the role of the private sector in collusion and enabling and facilitating corruption to take place at a significant scale. We've seen the evidence implicating companies like Bain, KPMG, SAP, outside of the State Capture Inquiry, the significant theft of funds at Steinhoff and the like, and we cannot turn a blind eye to that. So at the one level, there's an issue of recouping the money that was unlawfully paid over to these companies, some of that which has happened. And I just want to reflect on a tweet that the SRU posted earlier today, just about an hour or so ago, where they say that they received 1,276 corruption and maladministration allegations from whistleblowers during the 2020 to 21 financial year. And that with those tip-offs, the SRU was able to recover 1.8 billion rands, to prevent financial losses to the value of 2.7 billion rands, and to submit evidence in court to the value of 64.8 billion rands. So, that tells us two things. It tells us the critically important role of whistleblowers in combating corruption, because the very nature of these corrupt activities is that they're not easily discernible. It's difficult to get to find out about it. And so an anti-corruption system relies extensively on whistleblowers or people who provide information on a confidential basis. And the framework, as Valencia has spoken to, needs to be strengthened to protect those people and, in fact, to encourage them to come forward and provide that information that is so critical. Secondly, it shows that when the SRU is in possession of information, they're very effective. They're able to recoup funds. So that I think is something that should be quite encouraging to us. And we don't want to put on or talk about things just as being despondent about the state of where we are. There are some state institutions that actually go about doing their work and doing it effectively. But when it comes to private sector corruption, one other thing that I want to say is that the business community itself, and in particular organized business, BUSA, BLSA, other business formations, need to take a strong stance against their fellow business firms. And that peer pressure is going to be critically important because business can't say that our hands are clean when we can quite clearly see that there are many big companies that have been complicit in corruption and state capture. And how are they going to deal with those companies? Are they going to refuse as businesses to employ those auditors or those consulting firms within their ranks? And those are the kinds of actions that need to be taken if we're going to combat corruption, certainly from a private sector perspective. So I think there's a critical responsibility on the private sector to play its part as well. Perhaps just one or two other random thoughts from what you've said, Brian, is, has the commission been worth it? I would say absolutely, but, we won't be able to answer that question definitively until we've seen the report of the Zondo Commission. And then when that report comes out, the other thing that you've said is that, we've seen, with various commissions in the past, that they go through these elaborate processes, produce reports, and those reports and their recommendations get ignored. The Farlam Commission of Inquiry, dealt with issues around the use of live ammunition and the use of rubber bullets when, that the SAPS needs to come up with a clear policy as to when, the conditions around the use of live ammunition and rubber bullets. They haven't done so yet. We see that continuing, rubber bullets being used in an inappropriate manner and causing life-threatening incidents. So we must not allow that to happen with the Zondo Commission report. And I think that's the role of civil society, is going to be to follow up on the issues that we've been discussing here today, to follow up on the recommendations, and to make sure that they don't escape implementation. Let me leave it there. Thanks, Brian.
Thank you very much, Lawson. I think that's useful feedback. Advocate, your thoughts?
No, I think, it's what Lawson has said. I mean, it summarizes it very nicely. We tend to forget that corruption, there's always two parties when it comes to corruption. And that's where business can also play. Corruption is everywhere. And that's why business can play an extremely important role, and civil society. I think we need to understand, or we need to feel the power again to say no. Maybe not really deserving this example, but, you're driving along and a traffic officer stops you. So many of us will give the cool drink money, but at some point we need to say no. And by creating this culture of anti-corruption, I think it will flow, and we will make sure that we eradicate corruption, because it has a really extremely negative impact on the society. Whistleblowing is really one of the, it's mind-blowing to think that we sort of live in a society where whistleblowers aren't put up on pedestals and absolutely, get awards and all of that. And I think that's what we need to work towards, is that people, we're combating corruption, we are saying no to corruption, and there is this culture and power to whistleblowers to say, but that is the right thing to do. Unfortunately, currently, it is a bit of a sticky situation, and is the environment encouraging for whistleblowers? I don't think so, and we rely heavily on them. In my being exposed to whistleblowers, they are all the most courageous people you can meet, and thank goodness for the courageous people. But how do we create an environment where people will, feel empowered to stand up and say, you know what, this is what happens, let's not do it? And maybe I just want to add this. I think we have a lot of institutions in South Africa, and with the State Capture Commission, why that was so important, again, is highlighting the fact that, where was SACA? Where were URBA in holding to account sort of the private sector that enabled a lot of the corruption? So, in some instances, business are involved, but in some instances, they just create the environment for corruption to thrive. Where were these bodies that could take action against their members? The Legal Practice Council, making sure that their members are held to account.
Yeah, thank you so much, Advocate. I think one of the interesting parts about your conversation, Valencia, was looking at in telling the story about the impact of whistleblowers on the types of things that we're able to unearth, or the types of corruption we're able to unearth, is the human aspect of it. And quite significantly, one of the things that happened when the likes of KPMG were exposed is there was a financial knock on them privately, but also there was a sense that they had to now redeploy and shut off certain divisions as a result of the financial impact. And so in some instances, some people were responding with a sense of, oh, sorry, we didn't realize this was so significant that you had to sort of shuffle so many things around in order to be able to be more accountable, as it were. You, as I've heard, part of your work for the past 2 to 3 years at Corruption Watch, you were eating, sleeping, drinking the State Capture Commission. And perhaps one of the debates that you might have heard emerge was this commission in particular, because of the nature of how polarized our politics are, was said to be a factional battle from the ruling party or within the ruling party, that this is starting to become used to fight for certain factional battles as a result of this. And to some extent, even civil society was drawn into that space, particularly when we, as civil society, were in a space where we had to unite against a particular regime and say, listen, something needs to shift, something needs to happen, and specifically around the banner of Save South Africa. To what extent do you think that those discussions around the internal factionalism of the ruling party specifically, but also the harm that's as a result of the ways in which some people or some people who are brought to need evidence in the commission have created a spectacle of the commission? How much are people going to, how much are people likely to trust the outcomes, the recommendations of the commission, and what do we think that trust deficit will likely have on continued effort to fight maladministration and corruption?
I have to say that along with the point that you make of people who went out of their way to discredit the commission and its work, and of course discredit the chairperson of the commission, you also have the element of I don't want to call it naivety on his part, because he's a politician and he knows, what role he plays in the whole space. But when the president testified in August, was it, at his second appearance before the commission, where he called it, or he characterized it as a washing machine that is going to help revamp our structures and hopefully help us redefine, the anti-corruption work within government and things like that. Together, those two elements of what came out of the commission have had a bit of an impact on public confidence. If a whole president of the country puts so much weight on the shoulders of the chairperson of a commission to say that only when he gets a report from the commission is there likely to be action taken, and that whole reconstruction of government institutions that require that. I would not blame members of the public for not having the confidence, perhaps, in the commission that they should. It's, as my colleagues have said, it has been a very, very important process. It's been a very important mechanism, if anything, for us to learn about what happened and how, and who made what happen, and who enabled what to happen, and who blocked what from happening. And I think we have a duty as members of the public to call, to sort of to make sure that our political leadership in the country understands the extent to which we are discouraged, we are discontent, we are angry with the state of affairs and how the things that we've heard about from the commission. We have a duty to obviously within legal means, to voice our utmost opinions. And civil society, like my colleagues have said, plays a huge role in that. The more we demand accountability from here on, and now that the president, you've called this a washing machine, now that you have the report in your hands, make sure that the washing machine gets to do the work that it's supposed to do. And these are the measures that we think you can use to make sure to ensure that by the time the washing machine is done, this is how you measure what it has done and whether or not it has actually cleaned up government institutions in the way that it should have. We can't sit back and have a report that relies on only what the president is going to do in terms of implementing the recommendations of the Zondo Commission. So we really have to work harder as members of civil society to hold government accountable. And then on the issue of factions and how that has played out, that was never going to be, that could never have been avoided, unfortunately. It was always going to be part of the thread, the journey of the commission. And I think very commendable how the chairperson of the commission has been able to navigate that space. I think he's shown his independence over and over again. And I think his insistence on fairness and independence speaks for itself. I mean, there was never a point, I think, in the 3 years, you're right to say, I have lived and breathed the commission for the past 3 years, and I don't think I can point to a time in that period where there was any shift in his position as chairperson from that stance of being fair to all witnesses who come before him and being independent in how and being firm in how he conducts the work of the commission. And kudos to him also for handling such a tough task, although a lot of the work could have possibly been done differently, but nevertheless, it was a momentous process, and I couldn't agree with people who believe in the DCJ's abilities in handling the commission the way that he done. I couldn't agree more. That's what I meant.
Apologies, Brian, you're on mute.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. Thank you very much, Valencia, for the feedback. This is so unfortunate because I as you know, because of my technical issue, I wasn't here as long as everyone else, but we are having to come to a close, unfortunately. It seems a bit abrupt, but given the time nature of it, can we please allow for our speakers to just maybe give your final thoughts around the subject matter? And I hope that this is at least a start of conversation for us, particularly because as we expect the reports to come out at the end of December, hopefully very early January, we have an opportunity to dissect it in our individual organizations, but also then come to a space where we can reconvene this discussion and say, these are the things we appreciate, these are the things that we might need more work, and perhaps looking at what's good for us as citizens, but also organizations to take up the lead and move forward with. Let me start with you, Advocate, in terms of your final remarks and comments.
Sorry. Is that? I think this State Capture Commission was extremely important in order to just show us what happened. Validation for, yes, there was something that went wrong. And by pointing out what went wrong in order to find solutions. So it will be very important. Proof is in the pudding. I agree. Having a commission that did very important work, I take my hat off to Judge Zondo and the team for the immense amount of work that they did in 3 years, and looking forward to the recommendations. But now we need to see strong and ethical leadership in order to take the recommendations and do something, in order to create accountability, to create transparency. Also, civil society can never sleep at the wheel again, and that it is also our responsibility to make sure that this country is we have a beautiful country, we have beautiful people, we deserve the best, and we as civil society need to make sure that happens. And the same with whistleblowers. I can just, we need better legislation in order to give them the room, in order to give organizations like us and Corruption Watch and everybody the ability to take action.
Thank you so much for your time, Advocate, and thank you to ARTA for the work that you've done in the past and will continue to do so in the future in exposing corruption. Thank you so much. Mr. Lawson Naidu. Mr. Lawson Naidu, must the other colleagues know, and those who join us on the call, that you've been traveling quite extensively. And so for you to avail yourself of this discussion, I really appreciate it. You're probably jet-lagged at the moment whilst you try and get us into your...
No, thanks very much, Brian. This is an important conversation. It's a very important conversation. I just, but perhaps as a parting shot, one point I want to make. I think the Commission has done commendably well with a very complex task, as Valencia has explained. And I do think that there's been public confidence in that process because of the even-handed manner in which the Deputy Chief Justice has handled issues. I think where the lack of public trust and confidence comes in is in the ability of government or of the state to actually effectively take action against corruption. And I think that's something that is crystal clear now. And that's why I made the point earlier that corruption and state capture is continuing under our very noses, whilst this commission has been going on. So there are endemic problems, systemic problems that need to be addressed. And I'm afraid the state is incapable of doing that on its own. And that makes it absolutely imperative that there is a properly independent anti-corruption body to oversee the process, to give confidence to whistleblowers, to give confidence to the public that action will be taken. And I think that's something that we certainly cannot compromise on and have to insist that that happens. And then as a final point in terms of what you said, Brian, about, this is but one conversation in the process. We will hopefully have the report handed to the president at the end of next month, made public hopefully by the middle of January. And then just to let your listeners know that in March next year, CASAC, in collaboration with PARI, the Public Accountability Research Institute, plan on hosting a conference to unpack the report of the Zondo Commission, to make sense of its findings and recommendations, and chart the way forward for what pressure needs to be placed on particular recommendations to ensure that they are in fact implemented. Thanks, Brian.
Thank you so much, Mr. Naidu, for that feedback. And I think it's a very useful space for all of us who are in attendance today to plug into that space in March that you'll be co-convening with Harry. Valencia, your final thoughts and maybe recommendations?
I'd have to say one of the, reflecting back on the commission and the evidence that it has heard, I would have to say that one of the most disheartening takeaways for me, and I would imagine for a lot of members of the public, would be when we were listening to evidence that had to do with the state of affairs at state-owned entities, and the number of professional, skilled people that the public service has lost over the years due to the fact that maybe they did not want to carry on seeing corruption happen around them, or they were frustrated out of the public service system and things like that. So I would like to see, and using again the metaphor of the washing machine, I'd like to see once Cyril Ramaphosa has applied his mind and those around him have advised on how to go about in implementing the recommendations of the Commission's reports, that there's strong, there's active deliberation over how to regain the trust of people and make the public service attractive again to people that it had lost, who were honest, who wanted to see things done right, and who ended up leaving the public service because they were not protected, and particularly by those who were busy enabling or perpetrating corruption. So a very able, active public service that is capacitated with professionals who are going to help us restructure its institutions to the level where public confidence is restored by looking at those institutions and trusting them again. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Valencia, for the very hard work that you've done as part of your work there at Corruption Watch in the past couple of years to be our eyes and ears as a society. I think it's enough to just watch the news clippings from the commissions to get an understanding of what's happening, the in-depth discussions that are happening as a result thereof. Again, I want to thank all three of our speakers for their time, their dedication to the work, and essentially to the core of our democracy, to keeping public participation at the center of our hearts, the ability to keep people transparent and accountable in the various facets. On behalf of the Executive Director, Dr. Paul Kariuki, our board at DDP, as well as our co-owner. We do thank you for your time and your participation. And of course, this is where we end off for now, for the year. And we hope that we're able to keep safe, sanitize, social distance, all of that stuff, especially with the new variant. Very unfortunate news at the moment. But of course, we hope that most of us are vaccinating as often or as the opportunity avails itself. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.